40 years is a long time to harbor a grudge, especially when it costs you everything. One rusted piece of machinery changed 2 lives forever in the sweltering summer of '79. What began as a foolish act of charity ended in a bitter betrayal that a small town never forgot. Oak Haven, Nebraska, was a town where secrets baked into the cracked earth, and every man's worth was measured by the yield of his cornfields. In the late 1970s, the agricultural world was slowly suffocating under the weight of skyrocketing interest rates, brutal inflation, and unforgiving droughts. Adrian Ramos was a man molded by this harsh landscape. At 42, his face was already lined like a roadmap of hard seasons and close calls. Adrian was not a wealthy man, but he was a proud one. He operated a modest 300-acre farm that had been in his family for 3 generations. His prized possession, and the very lifeline of his livelihood, was a 1968 Massey Ferguson 135 tractor. It was dented, covered in a permanent layer of grease, and required a specific sequence of kicks and curses to start, but it was the mechanical heart of his operation. Adrian had a second tractor, a broken-down Ford 8N from the early 50s, rusting away in his barn, good for nothing but spare parts and housing families of field mice. Times were impossibly tight. The local bank, managed by a soft-handed, sharp-eyed man named Richard Sullivan, was foreclosing on properties up and down the county line. Sullivan circled struggling farms like a vulture waiting for the final breath. Adrian was barely keeping his own head above water, sacrificing sleep and skipping meals just to make the quarterly loan payments. Then there was Leo Hamilton. Leo was 16 years old, a boy who possessed the hollowed-out eyes of an old war veteran. 2 months before the summer heat truly set in, Leo's father, Thomas Hamilton, had died in a gruesome accident involving a collapsed grain silo. Leo's mother had passed away from illness when he was a toddler, leaving the teenager entirely alone in the world. Thomas had left behind nothing but 50 acres of stubborn, rocky soil and a mountain of terrifying debts. The county child welfare services had threatened to take Leo away, but the boy had barricaded himself in the farmhouse with a rusted shotgun, demanding the right to work his father's land and pay off the debts himself. The local sheriff, taking pity on the boy, decided to look the other way for the season. Adrian watched Leo from across the barbed wire fence that separated their properties. The boy was trying to till 50 acres of hardened Nebraska clay by hand. Day after day, under a sun that felt hot enough to melt iron, Leo swung a heavy pickaxe and pushed an ancient, horse-drawn plow without the horse, his frail shoulders burning under the strain. It was a suicide mission. Everyone in Oak Haven knew it. The townspeople placed bets at the local diner on how many weeks it would take before the boy collapsed or starved to death. One brutally humid Tuesday in late July, Adrian was repairing a fence post when he heard a faint thud. He looked across the property line and saw Leo face down in the dirt. The boy didn't move. Adrian dropped his hammer, vaulted the barbed wire, tearing his denim jeans in the process, and sprinted across the uneven ground. He found the boy severely dehydrated, his hands blistered to raw meat, his breathing shallow. Adrian carried Leo back to his own farmhouse, poured cold water over his feverish face, and forced him to drink salted lemonade until the boy finally opened his eyes. "You're going to kill yourself out there, kid," Adrian said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. Leo sat up, wiping a mixture of sweat and mud from his chin. His voice was barely a whisper, yet it carried the stubborn weight of absolute desperation. "If I don't get the seed in the ground by Friday, I lose the farm. Sullivan is taking it. It's all I have left of my dad." Adrian knew he should offer the boy a meal and send him to the orphanage. It was the logical thing to do. The world was cold, and charity rarely paid dividends. He had his own crushing debts to worry about. If Adrian's Massey Ferguson broke down, he would be the one facing Sullivan's smug smile across a foreclosure desk. But as Adrian looked into the boy's desperate, tear-streaked face, he didn't see a doomed neighbor. He saw a mirror of his own relentless determination. He saw the pure, unadulterated will to survive. That night, Adrian made a decision that would haunt him for 4 decades. He walked out to his barn, past the broken Ford 8N, and stood before his working Massey Ferguson. He patted the warm hood of the machine. The next morning, before the sun had even crested the horizon, Adrian drove the tractor across the property line and parked it in front of Leo's dilapidated porch. He left the keys in the ignition and a note taped to the steering wheel. "The soil doesn't care about your pride, son. Use it. Pay me back when you have a harvest." Adrian had effectively crippled his own operation. He spent the rest of the season attempting to fix his broken Ford tractor, pouring precious funds into parts he couldn't afford and working double shifts by hand when the engine inevitably failed. He nearly broke his own back trying to keep up, but whenever the exhaustion threatened to consume him, he would hear the steady, rhythmic chugging of the Massey Ferguson across the fence line, and he would smile. Leo was working the machine beautifully. The boy plowed his 50 acres, planted the seeds, and by the grace of sheer willpower, managed to coax a crop out of the dead soil. The town of Oak Haven watched in stunned silence. Adrian Ramos, the gruff, solitary farmer, had given away his lifeline to an orphan. It was the stuff of local legend. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed like the ultimate triumph of human decency. Autumn arrived with a biting chill, painting the Nebraska plains in swathes of gold and brittle brown. Leo Hamilton's harvest was modest, but it was enough. He managed to sell his corn to the local co-op, earning just enough to hold Richard Sullivan and the bank at bay for another winter. Adrian, on the other hand, had suffered terribly. Without his primary tractor, his own yield was down by nearly 40%. He had narrowly avoided foreclosure himself by selling off a small 5-acre parcel of timberland, a desperate move that left a sour taste in his mouth. Still, Adrian believed in what he had done. He waited for Leo to come over, perhaps with a firm handshake, a portion of the harvest money, and the keys to the Massey Ferguson. But November crept in, bringing frosts that hardened the ground like concrete. Leo didn't visit. Adrian assumed the boy was busy winterizing his drafty house. Then, on a freezing Tuesday morning, Adrian walked out to his porch with a mug of black coffee and looked across the fence. The Hamilton farm was eerily silent. There was no smoke rising from the stone chimney. The front door of the farmhouse was swinging wildly in the wind, banging against the siding. A knot tightened in Adrian's stomach. He pulled on his heavy canvas coat and walked over. The house was completely empty. The meager furniture had been stripped away. The fireplace was cold. And out in the barn, the spot where the Massey Ferguson should have been parked was empty. There were fresh, heavy tire tracks leading out of the dirt driveway, merging onto the county highway and disappearing toward the east. Leo was gone. The tractor was gone. By noon, the entire town of Oak Haven was buzzing with the scandal. Beatrice Higgins, the town gossip who ran the local post office, was the first to spread the poison. "I told you so," she chirped to anyone who would listen. That boy had bad blood. Thomas Hamilton owed money to shady people in Omaha. That little rat Leo sold Adrian's tractor for quick cash, packed his bags, and hitched a ride to Chicago. He robbed the only man who ever helped him. Adrian refused to believe it at first. He drove his rusted truck into town, asking around the gas station, the diner, and the co-op. But the evidence was damning. A trucker passing through claimed he saw a kid, matching Leo's description, selling a red Massey Ferguson to a scrap and equipment dealer 2 counties over for a fistful of $100 bills. The betrayal hit Adrian like a physical blow to the chest. It wasn't just the loss of the machine, it was the utter devastation of his faith in humanity. He had risked his livelihood, bled for his own harvest, and extended his hand in pure compassion, only to have it severed. The humiliation was absolute. When Adrian walked into the diner, conversations would abruptly stop. He could feel the pitying stares and hear the whispered mockery. There goes Adrian Ramos, the biggest fool in Oak Haven. The winter of 1980 was brutal. Without the Massey Ferguson and entirely out of capital to buy a replacement, Adrian fell hopelessly behind. When spring arrived, he couldn't afford enough seed. When autumn returned, he had almost nothing to harvest. The downward spiral was rapid and vicious. Year after year, Richard Sullivan chipped away at Adrian's farm. A 10-acre parcel here, a 20-acre parcel there. Adrian's heart hardened. The gruff but fair man vanished, replaced by a bitter, isolated recluse. He built taller fences. He stopped waving to neighbors on the county road. When the local church asked for donations, he slammed his door. When a stranded motorist blew a tire near his property line, Adrian simply closed his blinds and ignored them. The betrayal had fundamentally rewired his soul. Charity was a lie. Kindness was a weakness waiting to be exploited. Decades slipped away like sand through an hourglass. The 1980s turned into the 90s, and the turn of the millennium brought the rise of massive corporate farming conglomerates. The small family farms of Oak Haven were swallowed up one by one, replaced by soulless, automated agricultural empires. Through it all, Adrian clung to his remaining land with the ferocity of a cornered animal. But time and debt are undefeated enemies. By the year 2018, Adrian Ramos was 81 years old. His body was failing, his hands curled with severe arthritis, and his mind was plagued by the ghosts of his past. He lived alone in the crumbling farmhouse, his property reduced to a mere 10 acres. Just the house, the old barn, and a patch of dead grass. He had lost everything else. The town of Oak Haven had practically forgotten him, save for the occasional cautionary tale told by the older generation about the fool who gave away his tractor. Adrian sat in his dusty living room, staring at a piece of paper on the coffee table. It was a final notice of foreclosure. The county had finally run out of patience. The corporate giant that now owned 90% of the Oak Haven Valley was Hodges AgriCorp, spearheaded by a ruthless, efficiency-obsessed executive named Cason Hodges. Cason was a man of spreadsheets and profit margins, a shark dressed in custom-tailored suits who drove a pristine silver Mercedes through the dirt roads of Nebraska without a speck of dust landing on it. Cason had wanted Adrian's final 10 acres for years, not for farming, but because Adrian's house sat directly in the path of a proposed highway bypass that would connect the Hodges processing plant to the interstate. Cason had purchased Adrian's debts from the remnants of the local bank. He had allowed the predatory interest to compound, waiting patiently for the old man to suffocate. The final notice demanded payment of $150,000 in back taxes, loans, and legal fees. If Adrian couldn't produce the money by Friday at noon, the property would be auctioned off on the courthouse steps. And Cason Hodges was the only one holding a paddle. It was Thursday evening. The sky outside was a bruised, heavy purple, threatening rain that would not come. Adrian sat in his armchair, a blanket draped over his frail knees, staring blankly at the wall. The fight had finally left him. For nearly 40 years, the fuel burning in his chest had been pure, unadulterated anger. Anger at Leo Hamilton, anger at the town, anger at himself. But now, the fire was reduced to coal ash. He was just an old, tired man who was about to be thrown out into the street. Cason Hodges had even paid him a visit earlier that day, standing on Adrian's rotting porch with a smug, condescending smile. "It doesn't have to be ugly, Adrian," Cason had sneered, checking his gold wristwatch. "Sign the deed over to me today. I'll waive the legal fees and give you $1,000 to help you move into a retirement home in Omaha. It's more than fair. You're living in the past, old man. It's time to let go." Adrian had spat on Cason's expensive leather shoes and slammed the door, but the defiance was hollow. That night, Adrian didn't sleep. He walked through the empty rooms of his house, running his gnarled hands over the faded wallpaper. He walked out to the barn, holding a kerosene lantern, and looked at the empty space where his Massey Ferguson had once sat. The ghost of that summer in 1979 lingered in the dusty air. "I should have let you rot in that field, boy," Adrian whispered to the darkness, a single tear cutting a clean trail through the dirt on his weathered cheek. Friday morning broke with a cruel, bright sunshine. At 11:30, Adrian put on his only suit, a moth-eaten wool two-piece he hadn't worn since a funeral in the 90s. He drove his battered pickup truck into the center of Oak Haven. The town square was bustling. The county courthouse, an imposing brick building, cast a long shadow over the steps where the auctioneer was already setting up his podium. A small crowd had gathered, a mix of curious onlookers and corporate representatives. Case and Hodges stood near the front, flanked by two lawyers, sipping an iced coffee. He looked at Adrian and gave a slight, mock-sympathetic nod. At exactly 12 noon, the county clerk stepped up to the podium and cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today for the public auction of the property, located at 442 County Road 9, owned by Adrian Ramos. The starting bid to cover the outstanding liens and back taxes is $150,000. The crowd was silent. No local farmer had that kind of money, and even if they did, nobody wanted to cross Case and Hodges. I have an opening bid of $150,000, Kassen said smoothly, raising a small numbered paddle. $150,000 to Mr. Hodges, the auctioneer droned. Do I hear 160? Going once. Adrian closed his eyes. The gavel was going to fall. His legacy, his family's history, his pride, it was all going to be wiped away by a corporate checkbook. Going twice. Adrian gripped the wooden railing of the courthouse steps, bracing for the final blow. Then, a sound cut through the quiet town square. It started as a low, deep vibration, a rhythmic thumping that rattled the windows of the diner across the street. The crowd turned their heads, murmuring in confusion. The sound grew louder, a massive, synchronized roar of heavy diesel engines. Rolling down Main Street, moving at a slow, deliberate crawl, was a convoy. Leading the pack was a sleek, black, heavily armored luxury truck. But it was what followed the truck that made the townspeople gasp and step back onto the sidewalks. 3 brand new, towering Case YH Quadtrax 620 tractors. They were mechanical leviathans, gleaming in cherry-red paint and polished chrome, their massive triangular tank treads chewing up the asphalt. Each of these machines was worth over $500,000, representing the absolute pinnacle of modern agricultural engineering. They were so large they took up both lanes of the road, moving with a terrifying, unstoppable grace. The convoy came to a halt directly in front of the courthouse. The rumble of the engines idled, creating a heavy, vibrating pressure in the air. Casson Hodges lowered his iced coffee, his arrogant smile faltering. "What is this? Get these machines out of the way, there's an auction happening." The driver's door of the black truck opened. A man stepped out. He was in his mid-50s, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that made Cassen's look like cheap polyester. His hair was peppered with gray, but his posture was straight as a steel beam. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand. As he walked toward the courthouse steps, his eyes locked onto Adrian Ramos. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. The face had aged, the hollow, desperate eyes of a starving teenager, replaced by the sharp, confident gaze of a titan. But Adrian knew him instantly. The bone structure, the stubborn set of the jaw, it was unmistakable. It was Leo Hamilton. Leo walked straight past, stunned. Case and Hodges, ignoring the corporate executive entirely, and stepped up to the auctioneer's podium. He opened the leather briefcase and pulled out a cashier's check. "The debt is $150,000, Leo said, his voice deep, commanding and ringing with absolute authority. "Here is a check for $200,000. The debt is paid in full. The auction is over." The auctioneer stared at the check, his eyes bulging. It was drawn from a major national bank, fully certified. The debt is satisfied," the auctioneer stammered, banging his gavel nervously. "Property remains with Mr. Ramos." "Wait a minute," Case and Hodges barked, his face flushing violently red. "You can't just swoop in here. I have development plans for that land. Who the hell do you think you are?" Leo finally turned to look at Kason. The glare he delivered was so cold it could have frozen water. My name is Leo Hamilton, CEO of Hamilton Heavy Industries. And if you ever step foot on Adrian Ramos's property again, I will buy your entire corporate conglomerate and liquidate your division just to fire you. Do you understand me? Kason opened his mouth to speak, looked at the 3 massive tractors, looked at the check, and wisely decided to keep his mouth shut. He signaled to his lawyers, and the 3 of them scurried away toward their Mercedes. The town square was dead silent. The only sound was the low, steady idle of the $3 million tractors parked in the street. Leo turned around and walked slowly up the steps until he was standing face to face with Adrian. Adrian was trembling. His mind was a hurricane of confusion, rage, and shock. "Oof, you," Adrian choked out, his voice cracking. "You stole my tractor. You ruined me." Leo's eyes softened, a profound sorrow welling up in them. He took off his expensive suit jacket and laid it over the railing, standing before Adrian in just his shirt sleeves. "I never sold it, Adrian, and I never wanted to leave." The crowd leaned in, hanging on every word. "The night before I left," Leo said quietly, but loud enough for the square to hear, "2 men came to my house. They worked for the outfit in Omaha that my father owed money to. They told me that the farm wasn't enough to cover the debt. They were going to kill me, Adrian. They had guns. I escaped through the back window and hid in the irrigation ditch while they tore my house apart. When they left to search the barn, I knew I couldn't stay. If I went to the police, they would have just found me later. If I came to your house to warn you, they would have killed you too." Adrian stared at him, his heart pounding against his ribs. "But they said you sold it for scrap. The trucker." "A lie they spread to make sure nobody came looking for me," Leo explained, stepping closer. "I took the Massey Ferguson because it was my only way out. I drove it off-road, through the woods, across the state line into Iowa. I ran out of gas 3 days later. I was starving, sitting on the side of a highway. A construction foreman drove by in a dump truck that had gotten stuck in a muddy ditch. He offered me $50 if I could pull him out. I used your tractor to tow a 20-ton rig out of the mud." Leo smiled, a faint, nostalgic glimmer in his eyes. He was so impressed with the machine and how I handled it, he offered me a job on his crew. I swept floors. Then I drove excavators. 10 years later, I bought his company when he retired. Over the next 30 years, I built it into the largest infrastructure firm in the Midwest. But I could never come back. The men who were looking for me, the syndicate, they were active until a massive federal sting took them down 5 years ago. It took me another 5 years to untangle everything, track down Hodges AgriCorp's holdings, and find out what was happening to you. Adrian was weeping now. The heavy, impenetrable wall of bitterness he had built around his heart for 40 years was shattering, collapsing under the weight of the truth. "The tractor," Adrian whispered. Leo reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He untied the strings and poured the contents into Adrian's trembling, calloused hands. It was a set of old, tarnished brass keys. "Your 1968 Massey Ferguson 135, Leo said softly. "I never sold it. It's sitting in the glass lobby of my corporate headquarters in Chicago. It's fully restored, not a speck of grease on it. It's the symbol of my entire company, because it reminds me every single day of the man who saved my life." Leo placed his large hands over Adrian's trembling ones. "I owe you a harvest, Adrian. A big one." Leo turned and gestured to the 3 monstrous Case YH tractors idling in the street. "Those are yours. Fully paid for, with lifetime maintenance contracts. And my lawyers didn't just bring a check today." Leo reached into his briefcase one more time and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents tied with a ribbon. He pressed them into Adrian's chest. "What is this?" Adrian sobbed, gripping the papers. "Oh, I spent the last 6 months quietly buying up land from Hodges AgriCorp through shell companies," Leo announced, his voice carrying across the square for the gossips to hear. "That's the deed to your original 300 acres, plus the 200 acres surrounding it. 500 acres of prime Oak Haven soil, free and clear, in your name." The town square erupted. People were cheering, clapping, and crying. Beatrice Higgins looked like she had swallowed a lemon. Adrian fell to his knees on the courthouse steps, clutching the deed to his chest, the tears flowing freely down his weathered face. He wasn't crying for the land, or the money, or the $1 million machines. He was crying because the dark, heavy stone of betrayal that had suffocated him for 4 decades had finally been lifted. His sacrifice hadn't been a foolish mistake. His kindness hadn't been exploited. Leo knelt down beside him, throwing his arms around the old farmer, burying his face in Adrian's shoulder just like he had when he was a terrified 16-year-old boy. "Let's go home, Adrian," Leo whispered. "We've got planning to do." If this story of patience, sacrifice, and ultimate redemption moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder that good deeds never truly go unrewarded. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life dramas and unbelievable twists. Your support helps us bring these powerful stories to life. Drop a comment below. Would you have given away your last tractor? Let us know, and we will see you in the next video.